It's easy to think that we've seen it all and there's nothing that can surprise us, at least not by its mere existence. But sometimes life is a lot more complicated than that. If history has proven anything, it's that we don't know everything. Pandas, gorillas, rogue waves, giant squid, all of those were myths before they weren't. Dozens of sightings were just written off as folklore, misidentification, mass hysteria, or just people seeking attention until the right people finally saw them and suddenly science fiction became science fact. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. Today we're taking a look at three bizarre tales of things that shouldn't exist. But before we get into that, just a quick note. All of our tales are from true accounts, but over time details may get skewed or reports may conflict, so just take this as entertainment. In May of 1955, in the early hours in Loveland, Ohio, the streets were empty and quiet. You could faintly hear bugs chirping and humming in the distance, along with the streaming of water of the Little Miami River sliding dark and slow through the countryside. A man named Robert Honeycutt was driving home from a night out visiting friends when he sees something up ahead on the roadside. He slowed down a bit to see what was going on because at first it looks like it's possibly three kids standing together. And he thinks to himself, what are kids doing out here this late? And he's wondering if he needs to stop and check on them or call someone once he gets home. But the closer he gets, the stranger it feels. And it quickly becomes obvious that these aren't kids. Each figure stands no taller than about 3.5 feet, and their bodies are thin and they have like pale and strangely textured skin. And their faces are really weird. They're similar to human, but not quite human. They have these really wide mouths and bulging eyes, and really they looked more like frog than man. And then one of them is holding something and it lifts it up in the air. It looks like some kind of rod or maybe a wand, and it's got this metallic look to it, but Robert really isn't sure if it's metal or plastic or just what this thing is. But he doesn't really have much time to think about it before whatever it is starts to shoot out blue white sparks from the end. So Robert slams on the brakes. He's just stunned by everything and sits frozen in place. The creatures turn toward him and they've got this slow and deliberate movement. And for a second, he locks eyes with one. This cold amphibian staring back at him blankly, but also kind of knowingly. And then all at once, all three slip down the embankment and vanish into the black water of the Little Miami River. Robert was shaken, and he really didn't know what he had just seen, but it felt important, it felt scary, and it seemed like something that definitely needed to be dealt with by someone other than himself. So he lets off the brakes and headed straight to the police chief. He tells his story. He's sober, shaken, but insistent that he hadn't been drinking. He describes the sparks, the faces, the way they moved. He repeats it again and again, and every time with the same conviction. He's adamant that they, whatever they were real. And for years, the story lingers in Loveland like a bad joke. Some call it Frogman, others dismiss it as drunken imagination. But as time goes by, fishermen begin seeing strange shapes in the reeds, and kids dare each other to walk the banks at night. It takes on a life of its own in the form of a legend. And then, almost 2 decades later, it comes back. On the night of March 3rd, 1972, patrolman Ray Shockey is driving a quiet stretch of the Riverside Drive. His headlights were cutting through the mist rising off of the Little Miami when he noticed movement up ahead. He slowed down to get a better look, and right there at the edge of the road, there was a figure crouched down. It was 3 to 4 feet long, maybe 50 or 60 pounds, and it was hunched low like a frog, waiting to spring. And as Shockey's car approached, the thing raised up on two legs. Its skin was leathery and wet looking, And as Ray looked at this thing, he saw that it had a wide, flat face with big, bulbous eyes. And now he's watching, and this thing turns toward him, and it looked for just a second and then just vaulted over the guardrail with one smooth motion and vanished into the river. Now, Ray is shaken to his core. He pulls over. This isn't a drunk or a prankster in a suit. It's something he can't categorize. He files a report that night, official and plain. Creature crouched like a frog, rose to its feet, then fled. 2 weeks later, another Loveland officer, Mark Matthews, is patrolling the same stretch of road, and it's after midnight, and once again, something's on the roadside. So Matthews pulls over, and in his spotlight, he sees the same small, frog like creature, wet and upright. And he's shocked. He can't believe what he's seeing, but still not sure what else to do. He calls out to it. And when he does, the thing turns around, and seeing its face look at him, Mark could tell this thing wasn't human. And that's as if he had any doubt to begin with. So Mark pulls out his firearm and fires. And right away, the creature collapses. But it's not down for long. It scrambles up, slipping over the guardrail and plunging into the river. Now, later, Matthews claimed that he retrieved what was left and said it was nothing more than a large iguana that was missing its tail. Someone's exotic pet that got loose and was half starved. And that was the official line, but never mind that iguanas don't stand upright, and this would be the only case in recorded history of an iguana being mistaken for a humanoid. But in his original report, before the explanations, Matthews wrote something very different. He described it just like Officer Shockey had: upright, frog faced, moving fast on two legs. And now the Frogman is more than a story, it's an official police record. Parents warn their kids away from the riverbanks. Local papers whisper about creatures. Skeptics laugh, but the story sticks. Cryptozoologists begin collecting sightings, reports of hunched, man-sized frogs slipping into the rivers, strange lights over the water, a creature carrying a sparking rod. Loveland's river no longer felt safe. It felt watched. But for decades, the legend lied quiet. But then in 2016, it surfaced again. And of all ways, it comes through a game. A couple walking by the river at night, playing Pokemon Go, spotted movement near the shore. And at first they think it's a swimmer, but when they get closer, it stands upright, and this thing is definitely not a person. It looks like a humanoid frog. When they saw it, they both froze, and it just glared at them before slipping back into the water. They did manage to snap a few grainy, blurred pictures, though. Skeptics called it a hoax. Believers say it proves that the frogman never left. Our next story comes from Enfield, Illinois. In 1973, the tiny town was home to about 750 people. It was mostly rustling cornfields, farm animals, and dirt roads. It was about as quiet of place as you could find. Then on April 25th, around 10 p.m., 10-year-old Greg Garrett, who'd been playing outside with fireflies trying to catch them, busts into the house through the back door. He's terrified, breathing heavy, and holding one shoe that's been torn to shreds. And his parents rush over to talk to him. They ask him what's wrong, but he can hardly speak. Tears are just streaming down his face, and he's struggling to catch his breath. But between sobs, he's able to get out that he had just seen what can only be described as a monster. What he saw was some sort of creature with 3 legs and slimy gray skin, claws, and red eyes the size of flashlights that had just sprinted across his heels and vanished. His parents listened, stunned. They don't know what to make of it, but they're just happy that Greg's okay. Later, they would talk to their neighbor, Henry McDaniel, and learn that theirs wasn't the only family to face this thing. Henry had arrived home to chaos that evening. His kids claimed that something tried to break into the house. They said that it was scratching violently at the door and even the window. And McDaniel thinks that it's a stray animal, until he hears the scratching himself. And when he hears it, he opens the door, flashlight and pistol in hand, and there it was. It had 3 legs, a short body, 2 short little arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 feet tall, gray and just wrong, trying to get into the house. He fired 4 shots, and he was absolutely sure he hit this thing. And at this, the creature hisses like a wildcat, then bounds away in 3 leaps, covering nearly 50 feet toward the nearby railroad tracks. And they called the police right away, and when state troopers arrived, the creature was long gone, but there were scratch marks on the siding, and they were fresh and jagged. In the soft dirt, troopers found footprints, and it did seem that whatever made them had 3 legs. The prints were somewhat dog-like, but with 6-toed claws. 2 of the prints were around 4 inches across, and the third one was a bit smaller. Troopers examined McDaniel, and they decided that in spite of the wild story, he did seem rational, and he was sober but also terrified. And after police looked around and made sure the thing was gone, everyone just tried to put it out of their minds and get to bed. And as days passed, the fear and shock faded, but the hype had only grown. Other people wanted to see this thing. So on May 6th at around 3 a.m., when McDaniels is jolted awake by barking dogs, he leapt out of bed, grabbed his gun, and went out to investigate. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch to kind of look around, scan the area. And as he looks around, he sees it. There, near the railroad tracks, is this creature again. And this time it's just watching. And Henry doesn't shoot it. He watches it slowly walking, kind of aimlessly. Inside the home, buzzed with out-of-towners, including Rick Rainbow. He was the news director from WWK1 in Kokomo. Rainbow and 3 others grabbed a recorder, got to the tracks, and they see something. It's this gray, stooping, ape-like entity. It's about 5 feet tall, standing near an abandoned house, and it lets out this blood-curdling, just banshee-like scream, and then vanishes. And Rainbow records the sound, but the clip remains in his archives and was never publicly released. So word spreads, and the tiny town becomes a circus of reporters and monster hunters, and some come armed, shouting that they'll bag the beast. The White County Sheriff, Roy Posher Jr., he's just over it. He warns McDaniel to shut up or face jail. And he even arrests 5 men for shooting in the woods, claiming that they saw it too. And their story was that it was this gray monkey faster than a man. And the story pulls in cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman, who arrives to see the scratches, and he actually hears the recordings, and he heard the screams firsthand. He interviewed witnesses, walked the railbed, and admits to being mystified. He calls it a mash of swamp ape, phantom kangaroo, devil monkey. Nothing fits entirely. So what was it? A wild ape, an escaped kangaroo? Possibly the one that a man claimed that he lost the year before. Daniel rejects it all. He says that he's seen kangaroos before, and this was not one. And besides that, the footprints don't match. Our final story is from Dover, Massachusetts. On April 21st, 1977, this was a wealthy little New England town with stone walls, woodlots, and quiet back roads. It was the kind of place where nothing strange ever happens, until that night. 17-year-old Bill Bartlett, he's driving home with 2 friends. His headlights are sweeping across a rough stone wall at a roadside, and perched on that wall, hugging the stones with spindly fingers, is something that shouldn't exist. What he sees is a creature that's about 3.5 feet tall. It has a large watermelon-shaped head that looks too big for its body. Its body was hairless, with pale, peach-colored, almost gray skin, and its arms and fingers were just long and thin, almost spider-like. Its eyes were enormous, and they seemed to have an orange glow to them. And whether that was coming from themselves or their reflection from the car, Bill couldn't be sure. But what was really strange was that there was no visible nose, mouth, or ears. just those big eyes. And it turned to look at him, then crawled down off the wall and vanished in the underbrush. Bill was rattled by seeing that, but later sat down and drew what he saw, and his sketches have become one of the most famous images in cryptid lore. But that same night, just a few hours later, 15-year-old John Baxter was walking home from his girlfriend's house. He was about 2 miles away, and around midnight he spots a figure ahead of him on Miller Road. At first, John thinks it's a neighbor, someone short, maybe a kid, and he calls out with a polite hello, but whatever this is, it doesn't answer back. So John keeps on walking and getting closer and closer. But then the figure moves off the road into the woods, and at this point, John's kind of curious. So he's thinking, what is this person doing? So he follows, and as he nears a gully, he finally sees it in the moonlight. It's this thin figure crouched on a rock, arms way too long, and its fingers curl around a stone. Its head's enormous, featureless, but has these glowing eyes that lock in on him. And John freezes, and for a moment, the two stare at each other. Then John backs away, trembling, before turning into a full sprint home. He later describes almost exactly what Bartlett saw, down to the colorless skin and giant head. The next evening, April 22nd, 17-year-old Abby Barnum and her friend Will Tainter. They're driving when Abby spots something hunched by a culvert. She describes it as hairless with a round head and long, thin limbs. The eyes glow a greenish hue, different from Bartlett's description, but eerily close in every other way. And that makes 3 independent witnesses within 2 nights, all describing nearly the same thing, and none of them knew about each other's accounts at the time. The teens each drew what they saw, and Bartlett's sketch shows the spindly figure crouched low, its bulbous head dominating the page. Baxter's drawing looks nearly identical, and there were different teens in different places at different times, but their drawings are all of the same figure. Even police investigator Mark Sennett admitted that the witnesses were credible, with no motive for a hoax. The Dover demon never came back. Its entire existence lives inside of a 48-hour window in April of 1977. But for Bill Bartlett, it wasn't just a story. Decades later, in interviews, he still swears, I know what I saw. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal that I had ever seen before. And 40 years later, he admits the memory still haunts him, and he has never changed a single detail. And that's it for today's episode of Legends May Live. If you enjoyed today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. What would you do if you saw something you couldn't explain? Something that doesn't exist? Or maybe you already have. If so, we'd love to hear your story. Until next time, stay safe and keep watch, because legends may live.